His name was Marco. As a child, he learned to walk quietly, almost without sound, like a shadow. He didn't remember exactly when it became a habit. Maybe from the evening he first realized that the sound of his footsteps could break something. Maybe someone's mood. Maybe the silence. Maybe himself. His father wasn't always frightening. And that was the worst part. Sometimes his father came home tired, but calm. He would sit in the kitchen, sigh heavily, and stare out the window for a long time. On those evenings, Marco dared to sit nearby and draw silently. He drew trees, houses, roads disappearing beyond the horizon. He drew people without faces. "What's that?" his father might ask. "That's where those who want to be far away go," Marco would answer quietly. His father would grunt. Sometimes he even placed a hand on Marco's head. And then Marco froze with happiness. He wouldn't move, wouldn't breathe deeply. He was afraid the warmth would disappear. But there were other evenings. The ones when the door opened sharply, when the air immediately became heavy, like before a storm, when footsteps sounded loud and uneven, and Marco already knew, tonight he had to disappear. Hide. Be silent. Become small. Even smaller. His father never explained what exactly Marco had done wrong. Sometimes it was spilled tea. Sometimes a light left on. Sometimes just a look. The worst was when there was no reason. Then Marco understood. It wasn't about him. But that didn't make it easier. He began to fear sounds. The clink of a spoon against a cup. The creak of the floor. Even his own heartbeat. At night, he lay awake listening to the house breathing. Old pipes. Wind in the cracks. The distant hum of cars. And his father's footsteps, if he wasn't asleep. Marco imagined that one day he would become invisible. Not run away. Not hide. Just stop existing for someone else's anger. At school he was silent. Teachers called him quiet and polite. Classmates called him strange. He didn't argue, didn't run, didn't shout. He was simply careful. Always. Once, a teacher asked the class to write an essay. "What does home mean to me?" Marco sat over a blank sheet of paper for a long time. Then he wrote only one sentence. "Home is the place where you know how not to breathe too loudly." He got an excellent grade. The teacher said it was very profound. He didn't understand why she thought it was beautiful. When he was 13, he stopped crying. Not because it stopped hurting, but because crying made his father angrier. When he was 15, he learned to look through people. It helped him not react. When he was 16, he started working after school, stocking shelves in a shop, carrying boxes, mopping floors. The important thing was to come home later. That year, he thought for the first time, "I will grow up, and I will leave." Not out of hatred, out of necessity. At 17, he was almost taller than his father. It was a strange feeling. The world seemed to change proportions. The kitchen became smaller, doorways lower, and his father seemed to shrink. But the fear didn't disappear. A body can grow quickly. Memory cannot. One evening his father got angry again. The reason was minor, a broken plate. His hand was already raised, and suddenly it froze in the air. Because Marco didn't step back. He simply stood there, looking straight ahead. Without challenge. Without anger. Just no longer shrinking. Silence hung between them. Long, thick. His father lowered his hand and left the kitchen. That night Marco didn't sleep. He understood. Fear no longer kept his father strong. Fear had kept him weak. He left home at 19.
No loud farewell. No argument. No embrace.
He simply packed his things, left the key on the table, and closed the door. He expected to feel freedom. But at first he felt only silence. Silence, without tension. Without waiting for a blow. Without constant listening. It was unfamiliar. Almost empty. It took him years to learn how to live in it. Marco grew up. Finished university.
Found a job.
Learned to laugh. Awkwardly at first, then sincerely. Learned to touch people without fear. Learned not to flinch at sudden sounds. But some things never disappeared. He still walked quietly. Still sat facing the door. Still woke at footsteps in the hallway, even when he lived alone. Sometimes he thought about his father. Not often, but regularly. Like an old wound that no longer hurts, but reacts to the weather. They hadn't spoken for almost 10 years. Until the phone rang. The voice on the line was unfamiliar.
A nurse.
Calm, professional. She said his father could no longer live alone. His memory was worsening. His hands trembled. He had fallen several times. He needed care. You are the closest relative, she said. Marco was silent for a long time. Then he asked, did he ask about me?
He gets confused sometimes.
But he did say your name. Marco hung up and sat for a long time staring at the floor. There was no anger inside him.
No pity.
Something more complicated. He didn't know who this person was to him now. A father? A stranger? A memory? He went to see him a week later. The house looked smaller than in his childhood. The ceiling lower. The walls tighter. The air heavy with age. His father sat in an armchair by the window. He had aged suddenly, as if time had caught up with him all at once and refused to let go. Shoulders hunched, hands thin, eyes cloudy. Marco stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. His father looked up, stared for a long time, and quietly said,
Marco. His voice was weak,
uncertain, almost childlike. And something inside Marco trembled, because for the first time he saw fear can change sides. They sat in silence. His father spoke in fragments, mixed up days, forgot words. Sometimes looked at Marco as if trying to remember who he used to be. Marco answered briefly, calmly, without anger. But inside, the distance was still there. Large.
Stone-like.
He arranged the move to a nursing home.
Cozy. Clean.
With a garden and bright corridors. On the day of the move, his father held his sleeve. You will come? He asked quietly. Marco didn't answer right away. He looked at that hand. The same one that once made him shrink with fear. Now it was light.
Weak.
Almost defenseless. He paused. I will make sure you are well taken care of. It was true, but not everything. When he left the nursing home, the sun was bright, the air warm. People were laughing somewhere nearby.
He walked slowly,
and suddenly realized he felt no triumph.
No revenge.
No relief. He felt completion, like a book he never wanted to read, but had to finish to the end. A few months later, he came to visit. His father sat in the garden, looking at the trees. It's beautiful, he said when Marco sat beside him. Yes, Marco replied. They sat in silence for a long time. Then his father quietly said, I was strict. Marco felt his heart make a strange movement. You were heavy, he said. His father nodded, as if that made sense, as if he understood. Or maybe he simply accepted it. Sorry, he whispered. That word did not change the past, did not erase fear, did not return childhood, but it existed. Marco looked at the trees he once drew in his notebook, trees near which people could be far from pain. I live normally, he said quietly. I have a life. Good, his father whispered. When Marco left that day, he realized something strange. He had not left his father out of cruelty. He had left him at a boundary, where obligation ends and one's own life begins. He did not return to the past, but he did not run from it either. He simply placed it where it could no longer control the present. And that evening, returning home, Marco walked through his apartment for the first time in many years without trying to step quietly. The floor creaked. The walls echoed. His footsteps sounded loud. He stopped in the middle of the room and did not soften the sound, because for the first time, home did not mean a place where you are afraid to breathe. It meant a place where you can live.